Good morning, everyone. Welcome to March, International Women's Day on the 8th of March. And the theme is Break the Bias. So we thought we would start this month talking a little bit around some of the reflections and insights we've had as we've dug into this topic, V. And I think one of the first things that I guess we want to talk about, of course, there's all the bias that many of us would be familiar with, but there is bias that plays out, particularly in, let's talk about gender and gender bias. Particularly for women in the workplace.
Yes, and often this bias in the workplace is quite subtle. It's the default expectations. It's the things we think of as normal, and we're not even questioning them. Very often it's, who's going to make sure that we've got the tea and coffee or the drinks are organised, or who's going to make sure the kitchen's ready or organised or clean or the stock's ordered, or who is going to get the birthday card ready or organise the drinks. And there's lots and lots of little ways. And, in and of themselves, one or two of these are not necessarily a huge thing. It's that cumulatively, we're generally defaulting and expecting that women will do this kind of office housework, if you like.
Yeah, I think the theme Break the Bias, I think our perspective very much is around let's bring some consciousness and awareness to these sorts of biases. I think there's lots that we talk about in the workplace already about, what leadership looks like. And we have a bias towards traditional traits of leadership and even the physiology of, a tall, big man, as that's what we equate leadership to. So I think we talk about those and there is a reasonable level of consciousness around those. I think in the same vein, these smaller pieces are really important for us to be aware of, and then for us to do something a little bit differently. Because I think our general observation is most of, and I think, I get to live a better life and have, a better view of humanity if I believe that most of these biases are unconscious. They're not intentional. Most of it is operating below the radar, where, people aren't sitting there going, oh, well, it's the woman's job. They need to pick up the glasses and clean the kitchen. No one is actually explicitly, well, there might be a few, but in general, my belief and experience is that they are not conscious thoughts that are running through people's heads, and that we're not doing that on purpose. It's just a natural default pattern that is playing out for people. And the opportunity here is to bring some consciousness to it with compassion, with positive intent, so assuming positive intent, so that we can start to shift things gently, rather than, I think what can happen is this slamming people for perspectives that may have been true in their behavior, but certainly wasn't true in their intentions. And so I think there's a really important piece around compassion. There's a really important piece when we're having this conversation around what were the intentions, and perhaps giving people a little bit of the benefit of a doubt and assuming positive intention, and how do we influence the system to head in a different direction.
Yeah, I think this piece around, we have a lot of default expectations. Society sanctions certain behaviours. We have expectations. We think things fall into certain categories. It's part of how we make sense in the world. And so most of the time, we're just trying to be as efficient as possible, get things done, move through stuff. And because we're not always conscious, we're often letting some of those default pieces lead, and they have unintended consequences. And I think this is the piece that we're not catching. And this is actually where it's quite powerful, is to start to understand that while they might start small, they might seem insignificant, where are actually the bigger pieces here? Where are the defaults around, assuming that, for instance, that women are going to have greater caring responsibilities, and therefore that's going to mean less commitment at work. Just seeing gender differently through that lens. Or for instance, that single unmarried women have carry a certain amount of baggage, that they're cold or not as kind or not as warm. A lot of these pieces they're playing out quite subtly again, and they're having an impact in our judgments, in the way we think about people, and also the way those people are experiencing us. I think of that, the picture of Julia Gillard with the empty fruit bowl, and all of the stories and all of the meaning making that was made around this prime minister who happened to sit next to an empty fruit bowl, and all of these ideas and thoughts that were actually really unhelpful and distracted from something that we probably wouldn't have even mentioned if it had been a man.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's not to judge, it's not to blame, it's to notice, particularly some of these expectations and views that society holds. And then for us individually, right, we're a big piece of our work is all around how do we change our understanding of our own expectations, our own beliefs. We've just jumped off a Acts of Confidence Q&A, and one of the participants was sharing that the value of the program is really about elevating their consciousness. There's all these things that I don't do because, I'm not sure why I don't do them. I just have been unconsciously programmed that you don't ask for help, that you don't ask for what you want. And so now all of a sudden I'm starting to question those and go, how would I like to do things differently? And I think, yes, of course, there's work to be done in terms of changing the system. And, there's lots of different dynamics at play that influence that. And of course, we all have a role to do that. I think being really conscious of perhaps how some of these biases are playing out in our own behavior, because it's true for all of us, how they're playing out in the behavior that we're experiencing in the world, and then starting to look at what is the conscious choice and change I can make in my own behavior, whether that's I'm going to show up and do things differently, whether I'm going to ask a question or challenge something. And I really, again, suggest with compassion and assuming positive intent to start to influence perhaps how we do navigate and moderate things in the world.
Yeah, I think this willingness to question ourselves, to notice the biases. It's very easy, I think, to notice bias in other people first. Like that's sort of, we see it and that causes aggravation. And in fact, you could say to some degree, that's kind of heightened at the moment in terms of women finally speaking up and really feeling quite angry that, that men aren't getting it to some degree. And that the opportunity here is to, how can we show people, talk to them about it, engage them in conversation around this? Because when we slam people, it's very hard for them to actually orient and see what's going on. Whereas when we compassionately, to this point, start to unpack for them what's going on. Did you realize that you just asked Genevieve to do that? Did you realize that, in that meeting, and when we were talking about that candidate, that it looked as though you thought maybe there was a risk around, her caring responsibilities. It's again, having the question, having the conversation, asking the questions around what might be sitting underneath that default bias, raising that to consciousness so that then people can actually make a different choice.
Yeah, I love that approach. I think of a client we work with who their organization has just introduced observers into the performance conversations, just so that there's a resource there who can actually look out for some of these biases that, again, naturally play out in our behavior, so that with compassion, they can actually kind of spotlight that and go, hey, just want to check in what's going on here. Not with blame, not slamming people, but just being that friendly person in the room, helping others make sure that they're really looking out and some of the assumptions that we naturally make in the desire to be efficient, Fee, to your point earlier, are raised to our consciousness so we can do something about it. So lots to discuss here. I'm super excited about the conversation over the course of March. I think there's going to be some really interesting reflections. So stay tuned as we come to you every week with some new perspectives on this topic. If you know someone who could benefit from today's conversation or any of our other confidence conversations, please share this with them or tag them in the post below. If you'd like to be notified when we go live on Facebook, feel free to like us. Lots of other great resources over there in our Facebook page as well. Loads of videos from going live for the past few years. And of course, if you'd like to go deeper with your relationship with Core Confidence, visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au.